This is Kreskin, and just so you know, I did not predict the pandemic. A lot of credit's being given for my doing such. The truth of the matter is, 4 or 5 years ago in one of my earlier books, I speculated how I had a very strong premonition that a certain year would result in the setting of the United States shutting down, and it specifically was last year that I mentioned, but I had no idea the cause of it and what have you, just so you understand. In recent days, and I'm very concerned about this and feel that it's my duty as loving this country, but being very proud to be an American citizen, that I share my feelings with you. Recently, we've had a couple of disasters brought to the attention of people all over the world. Cody Cook, 80 miles from the Mexican border, car disaster in which a number of children, there were around 20 or so, and 10 of those children tragically were killed. And then a few days later, a number of traumatic incidents on airlines. And by the way, I have flown over 3.5 million miles through my career, and my advice to those of you with children is not to take children on commercial flights at this time. Private flights, that's one thing, but for a trauma, if you saw any of the scenes that took place, it would not be surprising if kids would be afraid to ever fly again. So just don't use your own judgment. I value that. We have, of course, right now, Cuomo's showcasing a sex scandal, which would probably be a headline play on Broadway, but and it's involving more than a dozen or so possible victims. But you got to compare that, and the tragedy is that we're not comparing it and giving an equal, if not more, attention to the amount of people that were sent by Cuomo into nursing homes, many of whom tragically died of a disease. That's an awesome, gigantic scandal, which doesn't seem to be on the verge of being solved. What's hard to explain to the rest of the world, and we need to be aware of this, because people, whether they're in England or Scotland or France or you name it, are watching and finding it difficult to understand how we're allowing businesses and homes to be destroyed, and the destruction is not being stopped by the military or by the police. It simply goes on and on. And then you have the president, and I don't want to describe this as an intellectual move, but I want to give him credit. This is a classic level of great stupidity. The president tearing down a wall that was put up for part of the reason, one of the main reasons we are American citizens, and that is to protect the American people. But the problem is that this wall was inundated, and we have thousands of people entering this country, including children. More children than ever before, some of whom have diseases that are fleeing into parts of the United States that we don't even know about. They've never been even tested for diseases. And the other tragedy is that many of these children have died. This is beyond belief. And anyone with common sense would realize that by opening a wall and letting thousands more come in, the results were going to be highly critical. Children are being used as pawns and then being abandoned by gangsters. And those who did not die, as I said, many are diseased that have not been diagnosed. I would like to, and I mean this quite seriously, I would like to interview the President of the United States. I'm not interested in any verbal answers from him. I don't even want to hear him speak, because I start shuddering. I feel like I'm watching science fiction. and a movie that never was completed. And this is not criticizing his senility. He is senile. You can see how I distorted the word, because that's how the word, it just cripples my thinking. But there is the senility, and he certainly is not thinking at the fullest. But we got what we deserved. We picked him as President of the United States. And the concern I have is when I speak to the president, I don't want him to answer me out loud. I want to spend, as I've done with some celebrities, as some of you know in the past, 3 to 4 minutes just sitting there silently, because I believe I can get a more truthful answer if he says absolutely nothing. He may deny my interpretation later on, but that's his privilege. I want to know what percentage that he feels of the children that died he is partially responsible for. And as he considered talking to those parents, they lost their children. They lost their children, or can't find them in the United States. We are breaking down our culture, and it's going in pieces. And that's a clue of my telling you what's going on in our country, because this is not accidental. We're censoring humor. So humor now can only be presented piecemeal. We don't want to, quote, offend. And yet in the Second World War, when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, I can remember going to a movie theater where I paid 15 cents to watch newsreels and westerns, and then the news, because we didn't have television news then. And there was Roosevelt slamming the chair or slamming his knee. You didn't always hear him, but it was because Bob Hope was mocking everything in sight. And it's interesting, the critics and the news people never criticized Hope. In fact, he was the scene with servicemen all over the world, American servicemen. In one of the great forces, one of the great tools when we are in conflict is the use of humor. We're creating a setting now, and this is not accidental. It's being very, very carefully contrived, of less and less gatherings. And when the gatherings take place, they are smaller groups of people. The Catholic Church already has lost, we don't know how many thousands of visitors to churches. And this is happening in the case of other religions. Less and less public, and movies are being censored. We all know this. And let's not worry about the communist China and the fact that they are making millions of dollars more money in their movies than we are. I realize we want to play games with them and so forth, and some would like to get involved in their motion pictures, but then we have to censor using their communist philosophy to edit out the way people are dressed, what they're saying, and what they're kidding. And songs, well, let's face it, we already have a list of songs that can no longer be sung. So our situation, and the most scary thing of all, is what I worry mostly about, and that is the future of our young people. Because look at how, would you actually allow your kid to go into public school today, when we now know that from kindergarten on, their education is being very professionally censored and edited by a plan that was worked on, as I learned about it 4 years ago, in universities in the United States. We're protecting people by, well, look at the goodness, look at the wisdom of our president. He shut down the oil industry to protect the people from the future. Thousands of restaurants cannot reopen, and that's in small towns and large towns. Now, it is true that as a result of this, a handful of major services of food are making millions of dollars. In fact, some of them, as I was even alerted last night, are hoping that maybe there could be a shutdown for another 6 months, because with people not able to go in New York City or New Jersey or many parts of the country to smaller restaurants, they're accessing by the ordering by mail and other techniques of these larger companies that are making millions of dollars. The massive salaries that are also, and this is one of the most ingenious techniques that's used by the filthy, rotten communism that's been taking place now for many, many decades. And that is massive amounts of money are being given away. Yes, money is being given away. As a matter of fact, our government is promising to pay children's education. They're promising to pay children's salaries. They're promising to pay their living conditions. And by doing this, and the food and so forth, the communist technique is enabling a further buildup of separating people so that they have less and less reason to gather. Using up the money, by the way. And where will the money come from? From the very wealthy. That's the way it was done in Russia. That's the way it was done in a half a dozen countries now in South America that have gone bankrupt because they no longer can attract people. They were taken over by communism. And once the money runs out from the very wealthy, then the inevitable takes place and communism dies and the country dies. We are in for a close down of much of our society and a narrowing of it. They talk about closing down. Can you imagine the wisdom, and can you imagine the political figures? How can we credit them with shutting down prisons in the United States where thousands in California and what have you were freed. And one of the heads of government at that time, one of the mayors, said that this may be a healing force for them. Let's explain that a little bit more carefully. These mayors and what have you were given a substantial amount of money, tremendous amount of money, by multi-billionaires. You didn't hear me say millionaires. You heard me say billionaires, because there is a finance behind the Black Lives Matter and other groups that have been given this kind of money. You might wonder, let's think about it. How would they profit, the billionaires? Are they going to expand? They can destroy people's lives with the money they have. These are not millionaires, these are billionaires. The problem is the solution, which we're not aware of. And that solution is, as I hinted to you before, and remember this, folks, one of the most powerful communist techniques is narrowing down the activities, whether it be music, entertainment, sports. When did you last hear about wrestling? Oh yeah, there's touching involved, yeah. One of the finest sports around, wrestling. I was an avid wrestler, and you hear next to nothing about it, but we can go on to a list of things, social activities and what have you, causing more and more seclusion, because even when it does take place, it's taking place with less and less people involved. So how are the billionaires profiting? Now let me let you in on the true matter behind the scenes. No, they're not making more money. They don't need more money. They're not controlling sports because they don't need to do that. The reason that they are taking on this activity is the reason why, and I'm sad to say this, I wish Orson Welles were alive today. This brilliant, brilliant actor who made Citizen Kane is considered one of the greatest movies ever made. He would be making a motion picture examining what is taking place in the United States at this time. And he would be playing one of the billionaires. I could give you the name right now. I knew him well enough that that's the person he would be playing in the movie. Because what are these billionaires achieving? The reason for all their activity: power. They're thirsty for power and power and power. And the more that they can control and limit and change this in a small percentage of billionaires, and if you know one of these people, think about it. And think about the conversations they have. And think, if you start to think of it, you'll start to see a pattern. So we need to smother the Marxism, which they are lifting totally to enact and influence every aspect of our culture. And we can, and folks, we will survive. Be the good Lord willing, we will survive. I love America.